The story was nearly lost until someone whispered it to the flames. Pull up a log, take a seat, let the dark settle in, because once the fire starts speaking, it doesn't stop. Some say the stories it remembers are just legends. Others say they happened exactly this way. But you'll have to decide for yourself. Tonight, the fire speaks of killers who didn't tie me in passing. They found each other like magnets in the dark. They shared rooms, they shared meals, and then they shared murder. These aren't stories of strangers. They're stories of twisted partnerships where trust became a weapon and companionship became a pact sealed in blood. Welcome to Crimes the Flames Whisper, the Devil's Roommates. Story 1, The Toolbox Killers. They met in prison. California Men's Colony, 1977. Lawrence Bittaker, cold, calculating, 37 years old, serving time for attempted murder. Roy Norris, manipulative, impulsive, 30 years old, and for rape and assault. Two men from different worlds, but with one shared trait, the absence of empathy. In prison, they talked, planned. Bittaker, the mechanical mind, spoke about making the perfect abduction vehicle. Norris, the predator, offered his experience in manipulation and control. By the time they were released in 1978 and 1979, they had a plan. They would target teenage girls, not for money, not for revenge, for the thrill. They bought a silver GMC van and named it the Murder Mac. Inside, they outfitted it with a toolbox, not for fixing anything, but for inflicting pain. Screwdrivers, pliers, ice picks, duct tape, everything had a purpose. None of it was repair work. Between June and October of 1979, 5 girls disappeared from Southern California. Lucinda Schaefer, 16, was their first victim. Walking home from church, she ignored their offer of a ride until they circled back and trapped her in the van. Inside, the men took turns assaulting her, recording her cries. Hours later, they strangled her with a wire coat hanger and dumped her body in a canyon. Andrea Hall, 18, Jackie Gilliam, 15, and Leah Lamp, 13, Shirley Ledford, 16, each one endured hours of torture. Some were stabbed with ice picks. Others had their screams recorded on cassette tapes. The last victim, Shirley Ledford, was different. She was picked up on Halloween night. What happened to her was so horrific that even seasoned detectives broke down. The audio tape, later played in court, became one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in criminal history. On it, Bittaker's calm voice is heard instructing Norris, while Shirley screams, pleads, and finally falls silent. Their downfall came not from forensics, but from a mistake. Norris bragged to an old prison acquaintance about their crimes. The man went to the police. When officers searched Bittaker's apartment, they found photographs of their victims and the infamous tapes. The van was located with blood evidence inside. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Norris testified against Bittaker in exchange for life in prison. Bittaker was sentenced to death. Norris died of natural causes in 2020. Bittaker died in 2019, still on death row. But the tapes remain locked away, too disturbing for the public to hear. Even among the monsters, the Toolbox Killers are remembered not just for what they did, but for how much they enjoyed doing it together. The two men couldn't have been more different on paper. Lawrence Bittaker was the kind of man who didn't raise suspicion in a crowd. Born in Pittsburgh in 1940, adopted by strict but stable parents, he grew into a quiet, methodical figure. He had a high IQ, tested at 138, and could hold technical conversations about mechanical engineering for hours. But his rap sheet told the truth. Auto thefts, assaults, and an attempted murder. His crimes weren't about impulse. They were planned, cold, and without remorse. Roy Norris was different. Born in Greeley, Colorado, in 1948, he was the storm to Bittaker's ice. His early years were spent in and out of foster homes, marked by abuse and neglect. By adulthood, his criminal record was dominated by sexual assaults. Norris acted on urges the moment they appeared, often violently, always predatory. When they met in the California Men's Colony in 1977, they weren't friends at first. But prison is a place where predators recognize each other. By 1978, they'd formed what investigators later called a mutually reinforcing cycle. Bittaker's precision feeding Norris's compulsions, Norris's enthusiasm feeding Bittaker's fantasies. They spoke in code about their plans. In the prison yard, they'd sketch out the modifications for a van. They discussed how to keep victims under control. They even talked about souvenirs. When they were released, Norris in January 1979, Bittaker in September, they kept their promise to reconnect. Within weeks, they bought a silver GMC Vandura van. They ripped out the rear seats and installed a bed. Next to it, they mounted a plywood chest to hold their tools. That's where the name came from. The Toolbox Killers. Their hunting ground was the Pacific Coast Highway. The van had sliding side doors, perfect for snatching a victim from the roadside. They would cruise for hours, scanning for teenage girls walking alone. Lucinda Schaefer was their first. June 24th, 1979. She had attended a church youth meeting and was walking home. They offered her a ride. She refused. That didn't matter. Bittaker and Norris parked ahead of her path, lured her with a fabricated story, and forced her into the van. For the next several hours, she was held captive. Norris later testified that Lucinda was calm at first, perhaps believing they'd let her go. That hope ended when she realized the tools in the chest weren't for construction. She was bound, gagged, and assaulted repeatedly. At some point, Norris stepped outside for air. He said later that he couldn't handle what Bittaker was doing to her. Yet he returned, and when it came time to kill her, he helped. They used a wire coat hanger twisted tightly with vice grips, strangling her. The body was thrown off a mountain road like garbage. Over the next 4 months, they refined their method. Some victims were tricked into the van with offers of alcohol or drugs. Others were forced at knife point. Jackie Gilliam and Leah Lamp were abducted together from Hermosa Beach on September 3rd, 1979. Jackie was 15, Leah was 13. Both were kept alive for nearly 2 days. The pair endured torture with pliers, ice picks, and vice grips. Bittaker recorded parts of it on tape. Norris later described the recordings in chilling detail, not just the screams, but the conversations between him and Bittaker. They spoke casually, as if they were discussing the weather, while deciding what to do next to the girls. The final known victim, Shirley Lynette Ledford, was picked up on Halloween night, October 31st, 1979. She was 16, hitchhiking home from a party. What happened to her is the reason the case still echoes in law enforcement circles today. The tape they made that night was unlike anything detectives had encountered. Shirley's voice can be heard pleading, "No, don't touch me," over and over. At times, she begs for death. Bittaker responds with calculated cruelty, telling her to scream louder. When the tape was played in court, jurors broke down. Several requested to be excused. Even the prosecutor left the room. Their downfall came when Norris confided in an old prison acquaintance named Jimmy Dalton. Dalton went to the police. Detectives set up a sting, bringing Norris in for questioning. Once confronted with the possibility of the death penalty, Norris agreed to talk, and talk he did. He led investigators to the sites where they had dumped the bodies, described their methods, and handed over the audio tapes. Bittaker was convicted on 29 counts of murder, kidnapping, and assault, and sentenced to death in 1981. Norris received 45 years to life. Neither man ever expressed true remorse. To this day, the tapes remain locked in a police evidence vault, their contents deemed too horrific for public release. Only a handful of people have ever heard them, and many wish they hadn't. Because the Toolbox Killers weren't just two predators who crossed paths. They were proof that when the wrong minds meet in the wrong place, the result can be something far worse than either could have become alone. Story 2. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. California's bunker. Killers 1983 to 1985. Some roommates fight over dishes. Others fight over who gets the next victim. Leonard Lake was a survivalist, a doomsday prepper before the term became fashionable. Born in 1945, raised mostly by grandparents, he grew up obsessed with control. Control over his environment, control over people. By the time he was an adult, he had already served in the Marines, done a stint in Vietnam, and dabbled in photography. But his camera didn't capture sunsets or smiling families. It captured bondage. Charles Ng was something else entirely. Born in Hong Kong in 1960, the son of a wealthy businessman. He was rebellious, impulsive, and thrill-seeking. Ng came to the US on a student visa, but his education was a cover. His real skill was theft, weapons, gear, anything he wanted. They met in 1981, when Ng answered a newspaper ad for a security job at Lake's property. That job was really an audition. Lake saw in Ng the same hunger he carried, the willingness to take without asking, to hurt without guilt. By the mid-1980s, they had moved into a rural property in Wilseyville, California. Hidden on that land was a cinderblock bunker, its rooms small, windowless, and locked from the outside. Lake called it his dungeon. The two men developed what investigators would later describe as Operation Miranda, a fantasy of keeping women as sex slaves for the rest of their lives. The name came from a fictional character Lake had written about in journals, a submissive woman who existed only to serve her captor. Their first known murders began in 1983. Lake's friend and his friend's wife went missing after visiting the cabin. Soon after, a pattern emerged. Entire families vanished after encountering the two men. Parents, children, even infants, no one was spared. The bunker was the center of it all. Victims would be lured there under various pretexts. A business deal, a visit, a place to stay. Once inside, the men's true intentions became clear. Ng, ever the sadist, handled much of the violence. Lake was the manipulator, filming, directing, keeping order in the bunker. Victims were tortured, both physically and psychologically. Some were made to watch as their loved ones were killed. Others were recorded begging for their lives. In one recovered video, a terrified woman is seen bound and gagged. Lake speaks calmly to her, telling her that her baby will be taken care of. The baby is never seen again. The murders might have continued for years, if not for a simple act of shoplifting. In June 1985, Ng was caught stealing a vise from a hardware store in South San Francisco. When police arrived, Lake tried to smooth things over, but the officers noticed something. In his car were 2 illegal, modified firearms. They arrested him. At the station, Lake swallowed a cyanide pill he'd kept hidden in his jacket. He was dead within hours. Ng fled to Canada, where he was eventually captured after a shootout with police during another robbery. His extradition took years, but when U.S. authorities finally searched the Wilseyville property, they found what Lake had been hiding. The bunker was a nightmare frozen in time. Walls lined with shelves of supplies, chains bolted to concrete, mattresses stained beyond recognition. They found over 40 pounds of burned and crushed bone fragments on the property, representing at least 11 confirmed victims. Inside a metal lockbox, investigators found tapes. On them, Lake and Ng documented their crimes, sometimes speaking casually over the screams. The men could be heard discussing what to do next, their voices calm, even cheerful. Charles Ng was eventually convicted in 1999 of 11 murders. His trial was one of the longest and most expensive in California history. He remains on death row in San Quentin. The Wilseyville property was eventually sold, but the bunker was demolished. The ground was left bare. Locals say nothing grows there now. No grass, no weeds, just dirt that seems wrong. Some say at night you can hear faint metal clinking like chains against a wall. Others say if you stand there too long, you'll feel the air go cold, as if the land remembers the fear it once held. And maybe it does. Story 3. Fred and Rose West. Some couples build homes filled with warmth. Fred and Rose West built one filled with silence, the kind of silence that hides what lives in the walls. Fred West was born in rural England in 1941. His childhood was marked by poverty, instability, and rumors of abuse. By his late teens, he had already shown signs of violence and control. Rose Letts, born in 1953, had her own troubled upbringing, shaped by dysfunction and isolation. When they met in 1969, the connection was instant and dangerous. Those who knew them described the pair as inseparable, but also volatile. Fred was charming on the surface, but controlling underneath. Rose could be warm and inviting, but her temper could ignite in an instant. They married in 1972 and settled at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester. It looked like any other townhouse from the outside. Narrow brick walls, a small front step, and a door that led directly into the living room. But inside, the atmosphere was different. Neighbors noticed curtains were always drawn. Guests rarely came and went. Behind those closed curtains, Fred and Rose created an environment where control was absolute. They isolated those who lived with them, discouraged outside contact, and made their home a fortress of secrecy. Over the years, lodgers came and went. Some were friends of friends, others were vulnerable individuals who needed a place to stay. Many were never seen again. The Wests kept up appearances in public. Rose worked occasionally as a caregiver, Fred as a builder. They were known to chat casually with neighbors, often standing together on the front step. But their smiles masked something darker, a shared understanding that they would protect each other at all costs. By the early 1990s, whispers had begun in the community. People asked questions about young women who had lived with the Wests and disappeared. Former lodgers spoke of strange rules, locked doors, and an oppressive atmosphere in the house. The breaking point came in 1992, when one of their children confided in a friend about what life was really like at Cromwell Street. Authorities intervened. During the investigation, police began searching the property. What they found beneath the floorboards and in the garden would make 25 Cromwell Street one of the most infamous addresses in British history. Fred West was arrested in 1994. Rose maintained her innocence at first, but evidence tied her to the crimes. The couple's trial would become one of the most closely followed in the UK, with the media dubbing their home the House of Horrors. Fred took his own life in prison before the trial concluded. Rose West was convicted of multiple counts of murder and remains in prison today. The house at 25 Cromwell Street was demolished in 1996. The lot has remained empty ever since. Locals say people cross the street rather than walk on that side. Some swear they've heard faint knocking from where the basement once stood. Others say the air feels heavier there, as if the ground itself remembers. Because even when a house is gone, the things that happen inside it don't always leave. The fire burns low now, but not out. We've spoken of roommates who found each other in the shadows, who shared more than walls, more than meals. They shared the same darkness. These were not accidents of fate. They were unions that fed on trust twisted into control, and companionship turned into conspiracy. The scariest thing, they walked among us like anyone else, laughed at the same jokes, shook the same hands. And then, together, they went home to plan what came next. If the flames spoke to you tonight, tell me, which of these stories haunted you the most? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you want to help keep the fire alive, consider joining us on Patreon. The link is in the bio. The fire remembers its true believers. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know what your roommate's thinking.